I think that opens a lot more attack vectors and surfaces for in general, because now everyone deploys in the cloud and super fancy and cool. It's, to be fair, it's easy.
Welcome to SAP Cybersecurity by No Monkey, where we are tackle SAP security together, where we break down those complexities of SAP cybersecurity and make them real, relevant, and, of course, actionable. I'm your host, Waseem Ajrab from No Monkey, and every episode we explore the threats, the innovations, and strategies shaping the future of SAP cybersecurity. Now, whether you are deep in your technical trenches or leading at the C-level, this is where we talk openly about what really takes to protect the systems that run your business. All right, let's dive in. Today, I have a special guest. I would call him my partner in events and presentations, also on OWASP. Julian, thank you for joining us for this episode where we are uncovering SAP attack vectors, or SAP BTP attack vectors. Sorry for that.
Waseem, thank you very much for having me. It's fantastic to be here back again. It's been a while.
It has. I remember we had our last, tackling SAP security in the old format, and then we had a few events together talking about different aspects. And I thought, why not with this new episodes that we are doing now for tackling SAP security together? I think it would be just right to talk about this here. I know a lot of people are expecting a episode for BTP.
Well, to be fair, BTP is a really hot topic nowadays. I mean, with SAP's clean core approach and moving everything to the cloud, I mean, there is BTP, just you cannot get around it. Let me say that.
Absolutely. But before we actually dive into BTP, what it is, what are the different terminologies, and then the attack vectors here we're talking about, how about provide our audience a little bit about your background? I know you're well known in the SAP security ecosystem, but a little bit of your background from the research you do, the analysis or the leadership that you are also working together on the OWASP, a little bit of that, Julie.
Well, I guess that's then the full episode. No, just joking. Well, if I'm well known, to be fair, I have no idea. Would surprise me, but thank you for the flowers. So yeah, my name is Julian Petersohn. I'm a threat analyst and security design architect for SAP Security at Fortinet. So here I'm basically taking care of the security integrations of the Fortinet portfolio and security fabric to provide customers some way to make SAP more secure on the outer layers. That's my day-to-day work.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I'm working basically with you, for example, on the OWASP project, on the core business application security project, where I'm leading the attack surface discovery project, all around scanning, identifying services around the network, finding SAP systems, fingerprinting services, making it more secure by finding your own assets on the internet, for example, or in the network.
Mm-hmm.
But also our latest and greatest project, the Pentest Playbook. I started it together with Marcos and you, where we start, hey, we need to do some knowledge sharing. Let's bring it all together and write it down. Yeah, that's basically that. And everything else is like having family, having some fun, and sometimes going out of the house, right?
Yeah. Other curriculum activities, I would say. But I want to go back a little bit. Your work also, I know that you started with SAP basis stuff, doing work on premise with different organizations before going to Fortinet, and now with definitely a global enterprise. How, during that time, how has the shift, now that we're talking about BTP, but we of course still see a lot of SAP applications or SAP application servers on premise, how has the shift to cloud changed the way attacks happen? For instance, our SAP Pentest Playbook, is this going to be very different when we are talking about BTP? We're talking about the cloud here for SAP.
To be honest, I have the feeling in general that I would keep it a bit more general, even besides SAP, that since there is that huge trend pushing everything to the cloud, the security posture is getting worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just my feeling. Because when we were on premise, usually we had everything shielded, usually behind a firewall, nothing was really in public or exposed or something. And now it comes to the cloud, and quite often you have let's take the SAP example. The SAP team, they now just go to AWS, click on 2 VMs, install their SAP, and cool, we can access it and it works. Is there any security? No. Is there any mechanisms in place? No, because they just don't know. Because it's as easy as just click on a box and you get a VM, and there you can drop an SAP on it. And I think that opens a lot more attack vectors and surfaces for in general, because now everyone deploys in the cloud and super fancy and cool. To be fair, it's easy. It makes a lot of things easier. Also, when we dig into BTP, it's like you do not need to care about the framework, is it set up proper and so on. No, just drop your code and run it and you're happy. But this results in, hey, is that layer below secure? I don't know. I don't care. I guess this makes it even worse.
It
Fair.
does. And I think within this discussion, I'd like to also bring a very important part of the whether BTP or not, which is the pen testing. We did this recently during last weekend, where we talked about what are the now or been so far the requirements for pen testing. So we keep that in mind a little bit going down this episode, because I think a lot of people are really asking this. I know it's still not clear also from SAP side. You need to actually write to them, even though they have an SAP note for that. But maybe we keep this in our mind. Later on, before we close, we talk a little bit about what are the requirements from a high level and where to look at. I know we always have problems when we are looking into doing this pen testing and requesting it, but at least we give a few hints here or there. So before that, I would like to start very basic. What is SAP BTP? So when we are talking about global accounts and sub accounts, and what are your entitlements, your environments, because I know that a lot of you listeners out there might be aware of what is going on around BTP, but a lot also do not know what BTP is and what kind of services support that. So to start with, this is maybe for you, Julian. Can you give us a small introduction or a small summary towards global accounts, sub-accounts, a little bit around that before we dig into the environments at least?
So when we look at what is BTP, so BTP in general is a platform as a service. So the idea is, if we compare it to like a classical AWS, for example, that's infrastructure as a service. So with platform as a service, the great part here is you do not need to take care of your VMs and the underlying infrastructure, ideally. So you really take care of what you want to work on, and that's, for example, your code, your application you have to run and deploy, and everything else is provided to you, like the runtime, the environment, and also made quite easy to use and consume. And for sure, we are in the cloud and in general in cloud environments, when we also speak with about AWS and Azure and so on, well, the idea is usually to do security through authentication and authorization, meaning you're not setting up classical firewall rules or policies and routing in the cloud. You're just authorizing app A to speak to app B. So, and the same comes then when we speak about BTP. In BTP, you have one global account. That's just one. It's there. It's like the master root account. And below there, you want to make sure that you have like separated and sandboxed environments, like you also have on-prem, for example, with you have a free-stage environment. Exactly the same you will achieve like with sub-accounts, because sub-accounts, first of all, are like isolated environments. And whatever happens in that sub-accounts stays in that sub-account, ideally. There are ways to break out and connect them together, but ideally, it stays within there. So usually you have, for example, if you have a free-stage sub-account lens, you have dev, QA, and prod, and you can configure them the same and do testing and development in dev. So you do not have all the halfway developed code and started projects in your prod and QA environment, as an example. But can you simulate it?
So basically, the global account is your contract that you do with SAP, which then holds all of your sub-accounts, and those sub-accounts hold different services, different applications, different environments, which is, I think, for us is one of the most interesting attack vectors here. Directly going into attack vectors is the environments that are there, or at least the applications that are being built there. Now, I know that there are certain services, or the default services that are not properly configured, like the destination services, which really connects with the cloud connector to your on-premise. If these are not properly configured, there's no certificates properly done, there's still a risk. There's a very high risk here. And that is a different attack vector, right? So this is where misconfiguration in the SAP world has always been there. Even on-premise, till this day, you still find misconfiguration and weak stuff. But I think this is more towards the organization, definitely. I do believe that SAP provides certain areas when it comes to protection. So I think I'm now sidetracking, but going back to the environments. So the sub-accounts contains the environments, different environments you could run. Environments are the actual, I would say, the actual platform as a service. And maybe from there, can you give us now, I know there are 3 or 4 environments. One is should be out of support, which is the Neo environment, but maybe a small words around the other 3 environments from your side, Julian.
Exactly. So there is then Cloud Foundry, Kyma, and should we call it ABAP or should we call it I like steampunk more. It sounds more fancy, but no one knows what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, if anybody hears ABAP steampunk, it is the ABAP, but now it's called ABAP Cloud. So
Yeah. Yeah, but also maybe one word on that. Really, to be fair, and maybe that's a shout out to SAP marketing. Could you please stop changing product names and everything else
Ugh.
every year? It's a bit annoying. And also don't bring back old names for new products because S/4HANA Cloud is now called Business Suite. So yeah, just on that, maybe someone listens to that, it would be great. So what are the three major things here? So yeah, as you mentioned, Neo is one of the 4. It's out of support, I think, even in the meantime, but it's still there for like legacy customers and stuff. Everyone who's now moving or has moved in the last couple of years in the direction of BTP shouldn't be bothered with that, and I think they didn't even see it anymore. I think it was from the time when it wasn't called BTP, it was SAP Cloud or so. Some years ago. So Cloud Foundry is quite old. It has been developed by VMware 2011, something around that. And what it is really just like a pretty cool environment where you have a lot of containers around, and whenever it's like an application platform. You would need to set up an application. Great. You take your code, write a description how it should look like and what it needs to be, and then just deploy it. Done. And
Yeah.
that's what Cloud Foundry basically is. For everyone who thinks that's too high level, I need to go a little bit deeper and need to do more and like interconnect certain services, do replication of things. By the way, that even works on Cloud Foundry, but be more advanced and so on. You could go to Kyma. Kyma is basically an extended version from SAP itself. It's an open source project, but at the end, it's just a raw Kubernetes, which has some other components in there. And it's like Kubernetes. You deploy containers, you build container networks, you have all the Kubernetes capabilities you want to use with some neat integrations from SAP, like the connectivity proxy, which allows you to communicate back through your cloud connector. And well, ABAP Cloud is your runtime in the
ABAP.
cloud to deploy ABAP. It's like, I guess it's because everyone in the SAP world only knows ABAP and they couldn't get the people to write now Java, Node, and Python code. So they had to bring ABAP in the cloud, and Cloud Foundry doesn't support it. So there's ABAP Cloud.
I think with ABAP, I mean, it was a surprise for me when this came also into the cloud, because most of the, I would say, vulnerabilities when we are doing a pen test, other than the misconfiguration, forget about those, is then revolves around custom code that is introduced into the application server, and of course it's based off of ABAP. So and during the move, because companies want to do this brownfield approach or whatever field they want to do, they want to move their code within the BTP, and they still maintain that. So yeah, I wasn't so not happy, I would say, but I was like, we still can do pen testing then if ABAP is moving to the BTP as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of one thing. I didn't forget to mention it earlier when you asked me if it's not better or worse for security. I think before we just didn't see it because the systems were all internal. So it's like, and now someone places that piece down in the public. It's like going, if you're naked in the house, that's fine. If you're going on the outside in winter, it's a bad idea.
Well,
I
true.
guess it's
Winter,
like
true.
that. But with what you want to say with ABAP, to be honest, I think yes, but ABAP is now quite well known, and there's also some good code and vulnerability scanners out there you could leverage. But now think of
Absolutely.
those ABAP guys who wrote that code, writing now also Python and Node.js code. So I guess there will be a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the minute you start introducing stuff, I always say that the attack surface starts to expand with it. So while these are great functionalities, even like Kyma, when I played with it a little bit and saw how it's built on top of Kubernetes and what's its capabilities, it's quite amazing, right? But definitely the attack surface starts to expand. And this is where we come in and we try to identify those attack surface and, let's say, weaknesses within those environments.
Yeah, and I also think, and that's maybe I think an important part. So the question is always who runs and somehow maintains and pre-configures those services. And I think that's the biggest game changer, because quite often it's not the guys who run the other Kubernetes environment and like the EKS and AKS and whatnot down there in the whole company.
Hmm.
No, it's the SAP team. How
Yeah,
often has an SAP basis team touched any Kubernetes? I think never, and
never.
that's exactly the point. So there's that lack of lessons learned, and to be honest, Kubernetes is a really complex thing. It sounds easy, but try to set it up at home, and no, you don't use a mini cube or a K3s. Use a full Kubernetes and set it up and run it for maybe 2 weeks, stable at home. Then you're good, because it's like a lot of work to do and to keep it alive and really understand what you're doing there. And I think that's quite often like which causes so often vulnerabilities and opens the attack surface for great new things for attackers.
I do agree on that. Well, it's exactly where I somehow led you to say that about responsibility. I like that because I would really like, now this is also very important, not from a technical perspective, but for our listeners who would want to understand this shared responsibility. And I think this is also something that we enable customers when we go there, and I'm pretty sure that you do the same thing on explaining this responsibility, shared responsibility, because there's this thing that now it's going to the cloud, especially around SAP, I would say, when I came into this Japanese world, it's going to the cloud, then security is getting better, SAP is taking care of it. Right. So, and then for their surprise, it's differently. Of course, SAP does take care of different layers when it comes to that, but maybe we can really discuss this shared responsibility. What is the responsibility of the customer when it comes to BTP? What is the responsibility of the SAP? And then you have your hypervisor, right? So because it's a platform as a service. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it depends on what you choose, but at the end, it's a quite difficult legal discussion. I think that would be an interesting session you should do with a legal person or a lawyer.
Okay.
No, I think it would be indeed interesting, because now taking certain examples, look into, okay, I have an app deployed on Cloud Foundry. Something gets hacked and someone breaks into Cloud Foundry and is able to exploit it and now sits in the management data plane from SAP. Whose fault is that now?
Mm-hmm.
Because SAP didn't secure it proper, because it shouldn't happen and go that far? Is it because they didn't patch it? Or is it the hyperscaler's fault because they did lateral movement through hyperscaler infrastructure? Or a managed service from the hyperscaler? Or is it my fault because I was the initial attack vector, because my app was it I have written? It's a quite interesting discussion, but from let's say a sales slide perspective, the customer's responsibility is basically just the app and the authorizations and the account. If I'm not properly secure my accounts, like with 2FA and so on, it's my fault if I get hacked. If I do not set up proper authentication and authorization in my apps, it's my fault if I get hacked. Um, but if like SAP, remember Log4j, certain SAP components had the old Log4j library implemented. Well, if I get hacked because of that,
Mm-hmm.
now it gets interesting, because if we think about RISE, how the service contracts are, they're different for every customer, and you would need to open a ticket that
Yeah.
this component gets patched. So is it now SAP's fault because they didn't patch, or is it your fault because you had to open a ticket because SAP hasn't been tasked to patch it?
Yeah, there are quite, like, when I read that Excel sheet, it's quite extensive for the shared responsibility and what SAP takes care of and what the customer takes care of. So also coming back to this BTP shared responsibility, I think for anybody listening, it is quite important that the services, even like the configuration of the services, this is a customer's responsibility. As Julian was saying, authorization, applications, integrations, and a very important one, integrations is still your responsibility. This doesn't remove. So SAP is responsible for anything that is under this layer of what you are building on top of the platform, depending also the hypervisor, which hypervisor you are, or you are with SAP directly. But then going to the cloud or to the S4, the different variations, private, there are definitely further responsibilities. And this is quite, I had this question recently, shared responsibility when you have BTP and you have, let's say, S4 private cloud, and of course your on-premises is your responsibility. Do you think that you get different contracts for the S4 responsibilities and the BTP responsibilities and not in one contract?
I'd say it's two different contracts, and for sure two different responsibilities, but to be fair, I think both are unclear.
Yes, I almost answered the same. And then I remembered one of our customers had really it's not just one, I would say. I think I've seen it everywhere with bigger organizations. They have departments to handle the licensing of SAP. So there are a few people who actually wrote books about it. And it's always my weak spot to talk about license. I have no idea where to start, where to begin with. To be honest, not that interested, but it is quite extensive.
That's why I say you need to involve a lawyer there.
Yeah.
For me, to be fair, I'm also not a guy who likes to read like all those laws and stuff. But at a certain point, you have to. Did you know when you step over the border, if it's legal or illegal, what you're doing? But it's super complex, that whole topic.
Yeah. I do
Especially
agree
also
on that.
to understand when are you responsible. Same like with your coding. I mean, you're responsible for your own code. If that's a mess
Yes.
and it's broken, that's your problem. And it's quite interesting what happens if your buggy code, for example, for whatever reason, races down the whole infrastructure. Who's responsible now for that outage? And that could get quite expensive and a real big problem in the worst case.
I definitely need to bring some legal entity on this tackling SAP security together to understand that even more. That would be great.
Yeah.
Should find one. All right. Going away from a little bit roles and responsibilities and all of the governance areas, and now really going into this attacker's playbook. We are building on the SAP Pentest playbook that you can find on the OWASP page or on silverbacks.com, right? Or Pentest
Playbook.
Absolutely. And you can definitely find some stuff. We are expanding the BTP attack vector, but maybe we can choose a few areas to tackle. I know we spoke about two important ones, and I would like to reopen that, especially when we have Cloud Foundry and when we have Kyma as well, and how that also enables us, I think, around Kyma to really, depending on what we're building, if there is also misconfiguration, if you are not using the capabilities that are there within your Cloud Foundry or Kyma, how you can then directly go, or at least move laterally towards your on-premise application servers. And that's the most interesting part here. Maybe, Julian, we can start with the attack vector of the Cloud Foundry, discuss it a little bit, and then move directly to Kyma before, discuss that as well.
Sure. Where should we start, right? Let's take something easy. Let's speak about SSH and Kyma. Super easy one, right? That's a supported feature for everyone who doesn't know. And when you spin up an app in Kyma, it's basically a container that gets spun up, fenced environment. And there could be for certain reasons that you maybe need to SSH in. And there is a certain command call for the CF CLI. The Cloud Foundry CLI is CF SSH and just the app name. And suddenly you're logged in as a user. It's a pretty cool feature. But when you look at it from a security perspective, it's quite scary. How it works is basically, first of all, you need to deploy your Cloud Foundry with SSH enable job. And yes, they do that. The second part is you need to allow it by default, or you need to allow it on sub accounts or in general on the account you're working in. And what would you expect? I mean, I teased it a little bit. It's enabled by default. So the only thing you would need to do as an app developer, you just need to enable SSH on your app. And usually you're allowed to do that because it's your app. You're a developer and you have the right permissions. And after that, every user who has the possibility to log into that sub account with the CF CLI can now SSH into your app. And to be honest, that's scary because everyone can now log into that and like get instance keys and certificates for the MTLS communication or tamper with your app or whatever he likes to do as an attacker. And my
Julian, so
recommendation, yeah,
maybe a question here. When you are referring to spinning up those Cloud Foundry instances, isn't those instances, so how can an attacker really reach these? These instances are exposed. They are not internally within your network. So these interfaces are actually exposed to the internet or to the public.
there is no way that you can deploy like an internal instance. I mean, you can, but then you cannot reach it in any way. You can deploy it without a route, then it's internal. But for that to work, that you could reach it anyhow, even between two instances, you would need so-called container-to-container networking, and that's right now not supported by SAP.
Yes.
But that feature in general exists.
So basically, it's an important part where, yes, these services definitely are allowed. So even if you have this SSH, you were continuing to speak about your recommendations when it comes to the SSH. So give us a few points there.
No, but it's a good point. And also keep in mind that SSH service is also exposed publicly. I mean, we're speaking about a platform as a service. It's all public accessible. And that means that SSH service is public accessible. So if an attacker is able to steal one of your CF keys, maybe through I don't know, ransomware or a stealer has been installed on whatever machine, and he has that OAuth token, for example, for Cloud Foundry, he could take that, log in on his own machine, access SSH, take your machine, because SSH was enabled. What you can do as a security mechanism is just disable it on the space. Just disable SSH support in general there, because even if a developer enables it, it doesn't work. That overrides basically the ability to use SSH. So if
in
it's
the Cloud Foundry
or a
space,
dev space, yeah, in Cloud Foundry. So if you request a developer needs that for certain use case, you can implement a ticket process, for example, to grant it to that SSH will be on a dev space enabled, but for security policy, SSH will never be allowed to be enabled on a production space, for example.
Yeah. And you mentioned service keys and authentication keys. I know we showed a little bit around how you can even get those within your environment or within your Cloud Foundry space. Maybe a few words what these service keys are, what they're used for, and what kind of risk are we talking about here if an attacker actually got their hands on keys like these?
Yeah, so it depends a bit on the way how it works, but in the cloud, usually there's a lot of stuff controlled through environment variables.
Yes.
And well, if you have access to a machine, you usually have access to the environment variables. At least there are certain ways how you can dump them. And what SAP or Cloud Foundry you could do, and that's by the way not on SAP in general. That's more a Cloud Foundry thing here.
Yes.
Maybe to say to be fair here, that's nothing SAP did wrong or so. No, that's really an intended feature, and that's how it works in general. Is that you can do certain service bindings. So as I mentioned, there is not like you have in the common network to hey, I want to connect VM A and B, so I have two VLANs and I need to connect them and set up a firewall rule. No, it usually works with, so for example, service bindings. And the service binding is nothing else than usually I attach a certain policy or profile to that app, which then has like the endpoint and some credentials in there. And through that, it automatically takes them and access then that application through a certain proxy, for example. It's only allowed to access this proxy or that destination. And yeah, well, guess where it's stored? It's in the environment, usually in plain text. So you can just read it out there and reuse it for something else. We had there a quite interesting discussion with a guy who works there also on an IETF project to do a bit more on that. Maybe that's something for later. And I also need to read deeper into that, but it's not yet implemented. So if you have access to those keys and those certificates, quick win, you're in. You
I think
can move laterally to those services.
I think the IETF also this guy was explaining about, it's not even towards SAP. He's doing a research completely with the Dresden University, and it's quite an interesting part of how the authentication can be protected in certain measures, which definitely it's something to look into. Then around Cloud Foundry, before we jump into Kyma, making this short, a few considerations that at least enable anybody that is listening to consider in terms of security. Of course, we said SSH, tenant isolation we also mentioned, but anything that also you said, yes, of course, the segmentation between production sub-accounts, and then you have your development sub-accounts, you have your sandbox, whatever you want to do. What other around services, around these keys, what other recommendations would you give our listeners?
Develop your application as it would be exposed always to the internet. Everyone can access it, and because it's exactly like that. So be 100% sure and monitor it properly. And I think that's also a big part. Monitor your application. I mean, to be honest, there will be always an attack vector we do not know now, but maybe we know in a half year. And maybe because it's a vulnerability in an open source library no one ever thought about. Remember Log4j? Everyone was like scared as hell. And right now we have it also in React, right? React is used halfway everywhere. Congratulations, you now need to patch it because there are public exploits out there. And the thing here is that it's quite important monitor, because in the worst case, you at least know that something happened and went wrong, so you can take care of that. Some stuff you just cannot prevent.
Okay.
But also here, use regular code scanning, and check your source code on what you're using and doing as libraries. Maybe as a short heads up here, SAP is doing such scans in the backend all the time. And I think by next year in the second half, it's also then made available to the customer. There is a new solution from SAP. And the last time I know about that was it's free.
Oh, interesting.
API
Even
free.
Supporting other languages other than ABAP.
Yeah, it's fully for Cloud Foundry. They're
Okay.
using a custom scanner engine, especially for such SBOM and in general vulnerability for open source library. What do they use? I think they use Nessus or so right now, but they're working on their own scanner engine, some other stuff. It's pretty cool. And they use it for their own infrastructure because a lot of SAP custom developed, and now they want to, and they also see what customers have deployed, but right now they cannot report it back because there's no channel. And they teasered it, I think, in the first half of this year at the DSHG meetup, and I think it should be made available in about a half a year.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Use something like that to get early notification when there's some vulnerabilities you didn't know.
I mean, there are certain, to be very honest, I know I'm now sidetracking a little bit, even on-premise till this day, there are certain functionalities that customers have no idea they have when it comes to checking code, when it comes to reviewing certain baseline controls from SAP that is provided within the license. So but it is when you do not know what consists, when, of course, this is an important part. So we'll definitely keep that in mind when it is released to actually inform everyone about it. Yeah. So to summarize the Cloud Foundry, going from the application, getting exposed to these authentication services or the authentication keys, also the service keys, going into that instance, and then from there, depending on which environments it is connected to, you could utilize this specific key to actually somehow laterally move to those environments if it is connecting with your app. So there is that possibility. There is that definitely areas where to consider to look out for, as that Julian has provided to us. Kyma, maybe if you also maybe an attack vector around Kyma, how it is also going towards your on-premise. We did manage to speak about it this weekend when we were presenting this topic. So Julian, the mic is yours again.
So to be honest, the same vector exists as well for Cloud Foundry. It's really, think about your cloud connector, because your cloud connector, make sure You do not trust whatever comes out of the cloud connector towards your internal environment because the cloud connector is not a security mechanism. It has some abilities like masking your host names or IP addresses, and it has the ability to, for example, filter on URL endpoints, which can be accessed. Yes, but do you trust everything else that is sent through? Hopefully not. And what you can do is in Kyma, it's so-called connectivity service. It's really just a proxy you deploy on Kyma, drop it in. You set up a configuration and configure your container or your application to be able to access this connectivity service. And after that, you basically can access through the cloud connector whatever is accessible.
Mhm.
We demonstrated with just accessing an internal Apache web server and another SAP system. But if there are the paths not proper configured, because you didn't know what you want to allow or not, which is quite often so quite often the case is really it's a combination of laziness and just having something to work and be happy that it works, which results in bad misconfigurations. That's what we usually find and see, to be honest. Or it's too complex to configure properly. With that combination, that usually results in, yeah, let's put in a wildcard. Hopefully it works and we are just all happy and that we are good. Because if business doesn't work, there's no money there. So management says business has to work, whatever. No one cares about security
Yeah.
and proper lock it down. And that exactly quite often happens. And then you can access whatever route is there. And if there's a vulnerable API endpoint, there you go. SQL injection could be there. Something that's not blocked anywhere by an cloud connector
And I
or
like
anyone else.
wildcards.
Yeah,
We like
wildcards are
wildcards.
fantastic.
I want to brings me to a very actually I remembered a question. So you said it, Cloud Foundry is oh sorry, not Cloud Foundry. The Cloud Connector is not a security component. It has features that can add within your security hardening. What about the saying that SAP tells you or tells its customers that you do not need to put a firewall in front of your cloud connector? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, that's definitely a bad idea. That's worse. No. Connectors should be always in a separate zone and segmented somewhere in the network to control what's going in and out. 100%. What is, and that's maybe a point where I say, well, it's, to be honest, Cloud Connector is a pretty cool and great way to set up connectivity because you do not need to allow any inbound communication. Cloud Connector sets up a connection, TLS encrypted, to SAP Cloud and spins up a tunnel connection. And that works awesome. And the cool thing here is you really do not need to open any port from outside to the inside. So you
Yeah.
do not need to expose any system. Fantastic. But now your cloud connector is a pretty critical component. And even there, who has access to that component? And quite often it's some OS admins and some SAP guys. And who can read through what's going through the thing? Can I see clear text credentials maybe even? Or can I do some sniffing and stuff like that? Be aware of that. Yes, it's possible. You can sniff on clear text credentials and cookies. You can enable traces for that, which you can see on the underlying OS. So even your SAP guy, maybe who has access to the admin UI, doesn't see it, but the US guy can read and see them. Be aware who can read whatever, who has credentials, and what things are stored even there. Because even if you disable the trace, maybe that file doesn't get deleted and it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even old credentials are super interesting, for example, for service accounts. Because usually, how often do you change the password of your service account? Even if
Agreed.
it's 64 digits long.
We still see those service accounts using those nice credentials that can easily be cracked. And then you could control your entire cloud connector and actually nobody would know that you're using it because you're on a generic admin username that is not then triggered actually, or at least you do not create different users for your different admins. No accountability. You cannot really know who did what in terms of that, even if you have the best logs turned on and your best SOC use cases, whatever they are. I would also then add that creation of users for different administrators or admins that are taking care of that component is an important part. So
funny story reminds me also. We also had some security audit some years ago on a customer, and before I joined Fortinet, and we went through the environment as there wasn't be any gate or something like that. The customer, well, yeah. Anyway, we were able to track you. It's like, pretty cool. How? Yeah, we had the
Oh,
logs enabled. It's like, cool. Why did you stop us? Yeah, because sure we have the logs, but well, they're going to the sim and that's where it stops. No one knows what to do with and how to correlate and how they relate to each other. So it's great that you have the logs and you could follow what someone did. That's great. That helps. But you should also be able to see when something happens, get alerted when such things happen, like an admin account is used. That should be never the case. There should be
no.
always a named account someone accesses through. Yeah, it's again, misconfigurations are 80% of any problems. By the
Yep.
way, through the attack surface discovery, we regularly scan through the internet what is exposed there and looking for showdown and so on. You wouldn't guess how many SAP cloud connectors are exposed with the admin interface to the public internet. And no, they're not demo systems at SAP. No, they're actually at customers. It's
And
like,
you still don't need
why?
a firewall. No, yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, this entire threat detection monitoring, I'm actually doing a separate episode for this. One of my favorite topics when it comes to SAP, because I think we can spend another 2 hours speaking about this
Easily.
easily. Before we start dialing it down, Julian, I want your top 3 things right now organizations should do to reduce BTP risk. 3 things, your top 3 things.
I think number one should be that you sit together with your cybersecurity team because BTP is a cloud and it has many characteristics from any other cloud. But for the SAP world, that's something new. So that's a pretty new world environment and provides new rules and regulations. Sit down with the cybersecurity guys, exchange what they have as lessons learned, what they, for example, would take out or what they would request, even from SAP, what they need to get to make it proper secure. Number 2 would be revisit just your connectivity, which application can reach which endpoint, and look into what is possible. Also look, for example, into Fiori Launchpad. Fiori Launchpad also leverages SAP Cloud Connector. It's just a service in BTP. Do you trust whatever gets typed in there and sent to your backend system? Is that trusted input? Because SAP doesn't filter the input. SAP is just providing the front and the UI, and the data is just sent raw to your system. It's not SAP's job to secure that. So that's the point. And the third one is think about code security aside from ABAP. Because right now, everyone in SAP looks into ABAP. That's great. That's definitely what you should do. But now we can write stuff in other languages. And when we look into how vibe coding and like using AI assistant coding, to be fair, it's quite easy to write apps in other languages. And also make your developers aware for code vulnerability scanning. Even if you use the CAP, the cloud application programming model, which is pretty cool, but still doesn't say that it's 100% secure language. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So these are my 3 things. Well, I have a fourth.
Yeah, do it.
Monitor your environment.
I knew you were going with that. I would, for me, that would be like number 2 or something, but no. I do agree on you. Like even the first point you said there, yes, it's so important. We speak about this all the time. Like your cybersecurity department, they know if you are listening from an SAP background all your life, your cybersecurity or have been working with the cloud, on the cloud, with whatever form or variable of the cloud for a very long time. This is where I think even if you are moving to the cloud where these silos existed earlier on premise, this should also disappear or hopefully disappear in the cloud. So the first point I quite like. It's what we try to preach here at No Monkey a lot with those these silos that happen. We do see a complete change when they start talking about this together. We definitely see that. And to be honest, there are organizations that are quite proactive when it comes to this, where the proper roles and responsibilities the departments or inside the organizations are properly defined. And yes, they are integrated together, SAP cybersecurity or security with the cybersecurity people and so on and so forth. So there are organizations who are mature that way and they are proactive. And now they are trying to go to this more where monitoring is involved. I would definitely include configuration that is available by SAP and what is recommended. I would always push that because during Pentest, Julian, you also have seen this, misconfiguration is most of our findings and it can be exploited. It's not like, oh, it's just a misconfiguration. It can be exploited. So misconfiguration is definitely on top of also any list that we have because it's there. It's something that needs to be done, and there are documentation about this. Make it harder for the attacker to actually even reach where they need to reach. That's what I always say.
Make you as unsexy as much as you can.
There you go. I like that too. To wrap it up, I like that. Make it as sexy as much as you can. So I believe for now, I know that we can continue speaking about this. We always speak about this on a day or sometimes weekly or whatever. But I think that's a wrap for today. I know that I'm going to have you here to speak about especially our work towards OWASP, how people can really dig deeper into it, how we're going to change a little bit on the project itself, what those listeners out there that would like to support or would like to contribute. I'll have you coming up soon so we can talk about this project. But I do want to thank you for joining us and being a part of this community that's really pushing towards SAP cybersecurity. In all the different right ways.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And to be honest, I think it's the right direction and very important that we bring it to SAP cybersecurity and away from the old style SAP security. That's I think that will make SAP world a little bit more safer.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you very much.
For our listeners, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep tackling SAP security. Of course, together. If you liked today's episode, please don't keep it to yourself. Sharing is caring, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.